We're back for another one. And today we have another awesome guest with us. We have Ken Chapman, who's the head of XDC's network and the foundation here in the U.S. How are you doing, Ken?
I'm doing great, Jake. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, brother. So you were nice enough to come to the Digital Fusion Summit a few months back and speak on our panel about, I believe it was Institutions Meet DeFi.
Yes.
We had you on. So maybe that's a good segue. Maybe if you wouldn't mind just giving our audience just a little bit of background on yourself, how you maybe found XDC and ended up in this position.
Okay. Well, I'll give a little bit about my background, and then I'll go into XTC. As far as my background, after serving in the military, I have over 20 years of capital markets experience in traditional finance. I've worked for a number of firms to include Bank of America in equity derivatives, JP Morgan, Bridgewater Associates, and BNY Mellon. And the way I've got into DeFi or blockchain is Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater, had asked the question, "What's blockchain? What does this mean to my business?" And that question ultimately came to me. And so I went out and went to the big four consulting companies, asking that question, what does blockchain mean to a business like, like a buy side firm or a hedge fund? Nobody could give me the answer. And this was back around the 2016 timeframe. And this is back when there was no books, no college courses, nothing. And so if you know anything about Bridgewater is not a place where you can just tap dance. You have to be able to give, a really good answer, and also be able to stand behind that answer and explain it. And, I knew the business. I had a background in technology, but it wasn't blockchain. And so I went and started digging into it myself. And so the first place I started was I went and I read the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper, and I read through that. And my takeaway at the time was I thought it was absolutely brilliant as far as how it was solving the trustless transactions, the concept of Bitcoin. I thought it was, pure genius. But also at that point in time, I thought if it got big enough, the U.S. government would shut it down. And you could argue the U.S. government made a run at that last couple of years. But then, so I got a really good understanding of Bitcoin. That I went off and started to learn about Ethereum, because smart contracts is where you start to understand how it's applicable to the financial industry. And so I dug into Ethereum, learned about smart contracts. And then at that point, and this is really before tokenization was really a word that was thrown around, really got to kind of saw a possibility there, and saw what it, what it could do at scale for the financial industry. But still, it was way too early. And at that point, I thought, it would take, at least a decade for something like that to take off. And here we are.
Good call on that. Yeah.
We're back. Yeah, here we are. Almost a decade later. And then from there, in 2018, I left traditional finance and then dedicated fully to DeFi. My first run was with a company, CryptoFuse. And this company was solving the problem of how do you have trustless peer-to-peer transactions when you don't have access to the internet at the moment of time. And so you go from blockchain, you go off-chain, do the transaction, then you're able to log back in and go back on. We had a really good team. We had a developer who'd worked for the NSA, where our securities attorney was a Stanford law grad, really great team. And we were going to launch an ICO. And if you remember back to 2018, that
was the time.
It was almost the time for us.
Not quite. Didn't quite make it.
2 weeks prior to when we were going to launch the ICO, the Securities and Exchange Commission came out and announced that they were applying the Howey test and if our securities attorney looked at it, and what we were doing is, listen, guys, if you go forward with this ICO, you're going to be, kind of the first big project that does this. And the Securities and Exchange Commission is going to clearly view this as a security. And as an attorney, he said he viewed it as a security based on the Howey test. And it's like, guys, you can go forward if you like, but I'm not going with you. And so we talked among ourselves, and we're like, we're not doing this ICO. For me, for one, I would look horrible in prison orange. And so that was just, that was not going to be an option, just because the color wouldn't work. And so we tried to recover the company after that, but after, that fell through, closed the company down. Then I went to Wells Fargo. And at Wells Fargo, I was heading up tokenization. And so that was really my first foray into tokenization at a large institution, mainly focused on repo or repurchase agreements. Yep. And then also I was the crypto guy at Wells Fargo, even though at the time, Wells Fargo pretty much had a ban on anything crypto related. And so in 2020, I don't know if you remember 2020, but in 2020, price of Bitcoin really took off. And so across Wells Fargo, there were certain customers that were demanding products and services related to crypto. The high net worth customers were looking for the ability to get investment or to get exposure, and so looked at products for them to get them into funds. But one of the problems I didn't see coming that became a problem for Wells Fargo is this guy Michael Saylor, that most people never heard of him. I hadn't heard of him. And MicroStrategy, which I'd really never heard of, went out there and acquired Bitcoin for his corporate treasury, took all of his cash and cash equivalents and just
dumped it into Bitcoin.
Just put it all into Bitcoin. Publicly traded company. And so I'm like, wow. First of all, I didn't know you could do that. But there's nothing to say you can't, because nobody's ever done it before. So he went and did it. And so everybody thought, okay, that's a novelty. Nothing else is going to happen. Okay, next along, here comes Jack Dorsey, from Square, and he gets I think 800 million or a billion, pretty close to a billion, and he goes and does that. Well, didn't stop there. Here comes Elon Musk. Hold my beer. He went and did the same thing for Tesla, and so at that point, being at a large financial institution, if you're gonna, even if you're not gonna use crypto for a loan. If you're just going to assess the creditworthiness of the company and you have $1 billion there, if you're going to say Bitcoin, we're not going to count that. That's $1 billion hole in the balance sheet. And so that doesn't work. And so this is an exaggeration for effect, but the private keys couldn't be on Elon Musk's thumb drive. They had to be somewhere that was mutually agreeable to both, a company like Tesla and Wells Fargo. And so I went out looking for a solution. Looked at what it would look like for Wells Fargo to be a custodian, and at that point in time, that was a huge lift and no financial institution of that size was even thinking about doing that. And then I went out and looked at potential partners in the industry, and I looked at everybody, and ended up choosing Anchorage Digital. Anchorage, very good choice. Anchorage Digital had just received a national bank charter from the OCC, and so it made sense because it's the same regulator that regulates all the large national banks. And so, in working with, and again, it was a good choice, and it was such a good choice, I decided to leave Wells Fargo and I went to Anchorage. And so I was an early employee at Anchorage Digital, fantastic company, great team, great founders, and was with Anchorage as the head of banking and capital markets at the end of 2022. And from there, I worked with a number of companies, to include Endotech. It's based in Israel. It's a AI-driven algorithmic trading platform that started with commodities and moved into crypto, and most recently XDC. And I started with XDC back in January.
Yeah, that's a great background, brother. I kind of knew some of that, but that's even more than I realized. So kudos to you for taking the leap. I didn't realize that you had worked with Ray over there at Bridgewater, at the meritocracy that they have going on there. So yeah, very cool kind of origin stories. You've been in the space for literally almost a decade.
That's right.
Point. And so I guess, what made you make the leap over here to XDC? What did you see here that really caught your eye and made you want to jump? You've worked at a lot of these prestigious places.
Right.
They must be doing something really special here at XDC for you to want to head this U.S. division up.
In my career, and what I've done is I've always looked for opportunities, companies, projects that may not be what everybody else is looking at, but they're really a diamond in the rough. And to me, that was also Anchorage Digital. I mean, you look at Anchorage today, Anchorage is a household name, at least within the digital asset crypto community. And people were like, when I mentioned Anchorage Digital, you're like, hey, a good choice, good company. Yeah, people have heard of it.
And though you were like,
back then it was a risk.
Right.
It had just gotten the national bank charter, but not knowing what that meant. Does that mean that the regulator was going to come down on you so hard that you actually couldn't exercise it and actually do it. Anchorage at that point didn't have the name recognition that it does today. So it was a risk, but like I said, I looked at it, great founders, the technology just unparalleled, and and a great team, and also just really on a really good path. And so for XDC, the Angus, who's one of the team members, part of the markets team, just like me, reached out to me early January and asked if I'd be interested in working with XDC, and I didn't really know a lot about it. And so I started digging into XDC. I flew out to Dubai. I met the founders, Tul and Rakesh, great guys. Very impressed, very impressive. And XDC wasn't started by a couple of guys in the basement or in the dorm room. It was started by, two professional businessmen who had a really, really strong track record before they started XDC. And XDC was started to solve business problems. And it was, specifically trade finance. And so I met with them. I met with some of the other leaders within XDC while I was in Dubai. And so at that point, I started to really get to view it almost kind of like I did Anchorage back in the day. As this might be some kind of another diamond in the rough. And actually, the slogan that the XDC Foundation had at Consensus this year was "Hidden in Plain Sight," and we're all working to fix so that's not the slogan for next year, but that's kind of it. It's like, XDC is here, and I started learning things about it, as far as the technology, the team, the founders. And for me, it looked like another opportunity. And this is what I've done in my career, joining another opportunity where, it's poised for, upward growth.
Yeah.
And Bridgewater was the same thing. When I joined Bridgewater, it's not the Bridgewater today. It was Bridgewater. It was a few hundred people, and it was this hedge fund in the woods nobody talked about. Unless you were.
You're the secret sauce, Cam. Is that what you're telling me for these?
Well,
Okay.
Well, that's kind of the goal, is for XDC, here in the near future to be, another household name. And I believe it has all of everything it needs to get there. Also, and I'll just pause at that point.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. So I found XDC when it was 3/100ths of a penny, when you could barely get there, had to send Ethereum to this obscure wallet and transfer it over. And it was when it was an ERC20 token before it migrated to the XRC20 token, and you had to exchange over. Found it very early on. And trade finance, most people hear that term and they think, what even is trade finance? So maybe let's start there. I know Andre Casterman's done a lot to build out standards for the messaging.
Right.
People think about, so maybe this is a good corollary, the shipping container, right? If you look at a shipping container in Singapore or Dubai or the US or Japan or China, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, that shipping container has been standardized to be able to be shipped to every single one of those shipping yards, be put onto the trucks, and be able to be taken to wherever it's going, right? And so there's these other systems all over the world that haven't had that same standardization. But I think you guys are doing that or Andre Casterman in particular, for bill of lading, receivables, the way that data is managed across counterparties when they're transacting with these containers or, goods that are being transferred worldwide. And then once you have a messaging standard and a way to structure that data where everybody can receive it and it's aligned immediately, then you can move to instant settlement and all the fun stuff,
Right. Yeah.
that we want to do. So maybe give people kind of a high level of that use case in particular, and then we can kind of get into some of the other, warrants and other notes and different contracts that we tokenized on the network.
Actually, you gave a very good overview of trade finance. Just trying to think how to add to that, but trade finance, many people don't hear that term, and like you said, may not know what it means. But
Right.
but it touches everything you do in everyday life. Everything from the food you eat to the clothes you wear. Everything involves trade finance, and the trade finance industry, aside from the shipping containers and all that, just from a value perspective, is a multi-trillion-dollar, with a T, multi-trillion-dollar industry, and it involves every country in the world, and it drives the economy. I mean, without trade finance, I couldn't even imagine what an economy would look like. We'd all be You know,
It'd be all
every country.
yeah.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have, people are so used to going to the grocery store here and having access to bananas and pineapples and exotic fruits and all of these other international cuisines that people here in the US just take for granted, that show up, but if you didn't have the infrastructure or global trade at the scale that we do, you wouldn't be able to get access to this stuff, especially year round. Like you go to the grocery store and if they were just out of something, people are like, why are they out? Well, it's out of season here. You couldn't get it. So
And that's something Andre he's leading that effort pretty much across XDC. The what I'm focused on is more what's in the traditional capital markets. If you think around like the tokenization of any kind of product that you would have in capital markets, anything ranging from the tokenization of money market funds, tokenization of treasuries, gold or commodities, you name it. That's actually I was taking a step back and just talk about what I'm working on because that'll kind of lead into that as well. As far as the what I'm working on and what I'm doing here is the founders of XDC, Atul and Rakesh, like everybody else, saw what was starting to happen, back in November once President Trump got elected. Saw some promise, but nobody you don't know what's really going to happen until a president takes office. And so President Trump took office in January 20th and immediately started signing executive orders. And many of those executive orders had a direct impact on blockchain, digital assets, crypto, and that was really the indicator. But if you think about it, as a drag strip, you had the lights going down, and that when that light got to the very bottom and it went green, that was January 20th. And I tell you, I have never been busier since I jumped into digital assets from TradFi. I've never been busier than I've been this year since January 20th. And so January 20th, Trump got elected. 5 days later, I joined XDC. And I've been going 100 miles an hour ever since. And so the two things I'm focused on in XDC right now, and I'm predominantly focused in the United States because I'm focused on the native token. So getting the native token listed on U.S. exchanges. And there's a lot that goes behind that. It's not just simply getting it on an exchange. There's infrastructure that has to go behind that. For example, having a custodian, and not just any custodian, but having a custodian, a qualified custodian, a custodian that institutions are comfortable using. And we just announced last week that we have BitGo in the United States as a U.S. custodian. So we have so in the business you completely understand what having a qualified custodian means, but that also allows us now to interact with institutions and makes XDC the token more attractive to institutions. And it's also it's a prerequisite to getting on quality exchanges.
yeah, people don't quite. There's a lot of infrastructure that goes into the ability to actually send and receive transactions on chain and have that interoperable with a qualified custodian. Things that are EVM based tend to be a bit less cost prohibitive just because of the standard that is. And so for you guys, migrating from an ERC20 token, I wouldn't think it would be a huge lift, but there's obviously some differences there between your chain and how it originated years ago. So, there are some time, development costs, and also, other things that are required. So now you have institutional custody, you got insurance, you got a bunch of things that these institutions would require or need in order to be able to hold a token or a treasury or use the token. And then what you pointed out, and now you can get into the kind of the two prerequisites for anything are custody and the compliance for KYC, AML, back, all those things. Once you have those as kind of the bedrock, then you can kind of scale all of the RWA instances off of that. So you guys got Comtech, which we met with last year in February when I was in Dubai at their offices for XDC.
Right.
And they were tokenizing gold warrants on chain. So for me, and maybe I'm ignorant here, but my understanding is the technology in and of itself, as far as the blockchain goes for XDC, has been curated toward more contracts. Like if there's a contract that has value, it tends to be better represented on your chain than other chains based on the smart contracts and the way they're constructed for XDC. Do you see that to be the case, or is it agnostic?
Well, yes. As I mentioned earlier, XDC was developed from the ground up for trade finance, which does have the requirement for, smart contracts and smart contracts that, at a certain level, there's certain, and also,
I mean, so sorry to jump in, but like when I say a contract, I'm not necessarily discussing smart contracts. So like a piece of paper that's valued between two counterparties, that could be exchanged or represents value, right? So Comtech's not tokenizing the gold itself on
right,
XDC. It's a representation of value that's the warrant that's exchangeable for gold in the treasury, and which are two different things. I don't think people quite comprehend that even
right,
even still, is a lot of this stuff is a representation of value. So like if you looked at the COMEX, I think that you guys would probably win out for the tokenization of the COMEX on your chain, because those are paper derivatives or contracts that
right,
are trading for that gold, not the actual gold itself.
right.
Anyway, I just want to make that delineation there because I don't think a
Okay.
lot of people comprehend that piece of it. But yeah, get into, you mentioned derivatives and some of the other stuff that you guys are excited about. Have you seen any traction there with the banks now that you got BitGo going?
Well, right now with the large financial institutions, and it's mainly on the buy side of, or the issuers of like, one of the things I know that maybe some of your readers or some of your listeners maybe should to find out is this year has been kind of a big year for XDC. This year, back in February, we had BlackRock, State Street, Fidelity, and Aberdeen all deployed money market funds on XDC
Wow.
via Archax. Archax is an exchange
Okay.
broker custodian in Europe. And that was a big deal. And it kind of flew under the radar. And a lot of people just didn't really, kind of understand the significance. And it was also in Europe. It wasn't here in the US. But the significance of that is once, and again, the amounts of those were substantial, but that's not the important part. The important part is each one of those institutions has now had a taste or has now interacted and done something and gone live with XDC. That's the hardest part.
Right.
Like when I was at Wells Fargo doing anything, there's two things that kind of, to do anything with a blockchain like XDC. A couple things come up. One is who else is doing it, and so you had to say, well, this other institution similar to Wells is also doing this. So you have that, and then you have to get it through all of your internal control functions, whether it's your legal, compliance, risk, whatever it is. So the fact that we now have, four very large, I mean, BlackRock's the largest asset manager in the world. And so we've already, kind of solved the who else is doing this. Well, who else is doing this? So we have the biggest asset manager in the world. We have one of the top four custodians in the world. State Street is doing this. One of the largest RIAs in the world, Fidelity, is doing this. So, as far as who's doing it, we have the who's who. And so it is a lot easier now to do this at scale. And so not just with those companies, but with other similar companies, because you can walk in the door and have the conversation. And again, I was money market, but it doesn't matter whether it's money market or something else. It's a fact.
That's issued.
It's a financial, right? And so you can walk in the door and say, "Hey, we've already done this, and we've already kind of gotten the Betty Crocker seal of approval from some of these larger institutions because they've done this with us because this has been done. It was done with Archax, was the partner they worked with, but XTC was the chain, but they won't do that unless they do all their due diligence.
Right.
So the fact that that's been done, now it's much easier to go to the other institutions and say, hey, we want to work with you. And it's no longer the conversation of, who the heck is XTC? It's now we can say, listen, this is who we are. And we have some of the biggest institutions in the world are using our technology. So that in and of itself gives you, get credibility, but also will get you in the door to have that institution take a look. And also, people, that work in these large institutions, some of them, have a different mindset than we do working in digital assets. Some of these, they don't want to lose their jobs. And if they can come out internally and say, hey, I chose XDC, but, also part of my rationale in choosing them is before I chose them, So did BlackRock. So did Fidelity. So did State Street. It's very easy, within your company to just to say, hey, that's justifiable.
Yeah. No, we've had the pleasure of having Graham on the channel here.
Oh, okay.
So very familiar with Archax, great team over there. Super excited about what they're building for the tokenized marketplaces. And he had explained, I think even on the podcast that we had, about the money market and how liquid it was. Right. So when most people think about a money market fund, you're 24, 48 hours before you're liquid if you're at a bank. Right. Whereas this, you could trade all day long.
Right.
You
Yep.
could trade this between a cryptocurrency that you saw running out and then back into the money market fund when the volatility went away. So it's a very interesting play, and it'll open up arbitrage opportunities and a lot of other stuff that just doesn't exist today because of the frictions in the system, and all that's being done on XDC, it sounds like, which is super cool.
I don't know when you had Graham on your show to get Graham's a great guy. Archax a great company, but I don't know when you had him on the show, but Archax also this year has bought a U.S. broker-dealer.
They made that announcement like the Tuesday before I had him on, which was super exciting. Yeah.
And so what that means is
there's still some change of control that has to happen, but yeah, they had made the announcement. So,
and XDC has a great partnership and a great relationship with Archax, and so them coming to the U.S. That helps us, and that's a good for Archax. It's good for XDC.
So, I mentioned to you before we hopped on here that I have a wide variety of viewership. A lot of people interested in, the token itself and the net functionality. We also have people that are building things. If they wanted to get in contact with the foundation or get some help with that, is that something that you do, or is it somebody else in your team that they would reach out to?
Well, I'll say that if somebody's looking to build on XDC, the foundation is a good place to start. The foundation, and also I'll just go ahead and give you the URL because it's super easy. It's xdc.org. So xdc.org.
6 characters there. That's good.
It's only 6, so that'll take you to the foundation website. And the foundation, they do a number of things. As far as they also provide funding for companies that are looking to build on XDC. And also earlier this year, the foundation partnered with Plug and Play and came up with an XDC real world asset accelerator. And they have some amazing companies. There's 10 companies in there, but they have amazing companies in there to include like Polytrade, Tokeny, Plume. These are not like startup, beginning stage companies. These are companies that are further along, but the accelerator is also about helping these companies, make the connections in the industry and also help them with, business development, to be frank, and help them to go take their business where it is now and get more assets tokenized.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole point of the foundation. Hopefully, is they're driving the adoption of a network and providing resources in order to be able to get people that are working on that initiative to, further those things in alignment with them. So, anything in particular that you'd like to leave the audience with? Anything that you're super excited about in the near term for XDC or that you're working on?
Well, there's a couple things I'm really excited about, but I can't announce yet. There was one thing I was hoping to announce on this show, and I checked in just
slap your hand. Not yet, Ken.
Yeah, I checked in just 15 minutes before we started talking to see where it was at. But we have some really exciting things coming up. And just for XDC, we just celebrated on June 1st. We celebrated 6 years of being live, and so the development and energy around XDC has really accelerated, especially in the last 6 months. And the slogan that was used at Consensus, hidden in plain sight, there's a lot of building going on. There's a lot of prepping going on, and all that's being done to be able to set the stage for, XDC to be able to do great things. And also we're all on a mission to change the slogan from hidden in plain sight to it's not going to be that just XDC's just like other companies I work for. Everybody knows it. You say XDC, people will know what it is. So that's I would just tell your viewers just to keep a close eye on XDC. We have some exciting announcements that are going to be coming up here very shortly, and then also we are building fast. And you're gonna see a different XDC in the future than you do here. And I'm not talking about just the technology. I'm just talking about, what's being built, what the usage, the adoption, because it's like, everybody's on it.
Awesome. Thank you again for coming on here and taking time out of your day. It was great having you. And hopefully we'll have you back. Maybe, 6, 8 months from now, you'll have a lot more good news to share. And we'd love to have you at our event again next year if you'd be willing to take that on. So,
Oh, absolutely. I've already accepted the invitation. I'll be at your event. Thank you very much for having me on your show. I do appreciate it. And obviously, big fan of yours and a big fan of your company. And then again, I look forward to coming back here in about 8 months when XDC is a household name, and we can tell you everything we've done since this show.
awesome, brother. Thanks again for being here. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one.